All right, let's get underway. Certainly, we want to thank you today for joining to us for what should be a very informative session about the BREEAM USA in use protocols. Just a few quick items for housekeeping. This presentation is copyrighted and owned by BRE Global. So please no reproduction or distribution without express written permission. We are also recording the session, and we will make a link available to all registrants after the session. You can feel free to share this link with others who were unable to attend, or clients or other colleagues that you feel would get benefit from this presentation. We welcome all questions. We will be using the Q&A function of Zoom down at the bottom of the screen. Chat has been locked out, as well as your microphones. But please, any additional questions, feel free, because we'll be moderating that out, and we'll either answer them directly, or if we think that it's something that needs a larger discussion, we'll be kind of pausing and bringing it up throughout the presentation. So additionally, as a reminder, this is an accredited AI presentation. At registration, we requested your number so for reporting purposes. So if that is of something that you requested, we will send out your certificate within a week. With all that covered, we are pleased to introduce you to Brianna Wheeler and Alan Roddles with BRE. I am James Brower with Jordan and Scholar. Brianna will be our main speaker, and Alan will be moderating the QA throughout. Brianna Wheeler became BRE's Director of Operations in the US in June of 2016. BRE is a 100-year-old building science research organization focused on making buildings better for people and for the environment. BRE developed BREEAM, the world's first and leading science-based suite of validation and certification systems for a sustainable built environment. Brianna oversees the deployment of the BREEAM family of standards in the US. Additionally, she supports technical work on resilience and social impact in BREEAM. Prior to joining BRE, Brianna worked for 10 years as an internal advisor on environmental and sustainability risk management for large multinational corporations. With that, I will turn things over to Brianna. Take it away.
All right, thank you all so much. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Alan Robles, who will be doing a lot of the moderating on the chat. Alan looks after many of our clients, all of our clients, and their support. So great shout out to him, all of those questions going there. So I'm thrilled to be here today, and a big thank you to Jordan and Scala Engineers for hosting this and bringing this through. Really excited to talk about sustainability as a business risk and opportunity, and obviously how BREEAM kind of supports that conversation. So first thing we want to do is actually get a bit of an understanding about who's on the call and where you come from. So what sectors do you primarily work in, and what topics are you interested in? We're going to be talking about some of these topics, but really interested in who you are and what your interests are to help guide the conversation. So we're going to keep the poll open for just a little bit. And actually, while we're doing that, I can talk a little bit more about kind of where BRE came from. As James noted, we're a 100-year-old building science research organization. We do a lot of things around the built environment in that time. Sustainability is just one of those core pieces. So just a couple of images that you can see there. In our upper right-hand corner, you can see the one of our innovation parks based in the UK, where we essentially build and break technologies. That's always the goal. See where the limits are. We're building a lot of multifamily housing that's net zero energy, really exciting kind of technologies and things. In the upper left-hand corner is our structures lab, a giant 6-story concrete cube where we can test materials with all kinds of weather conditions. So for you building science nerds out there, this is the place to be. Let me know if you're ever going to be in the UK, where those research facilities are headquartered. We're happy to arrange tours and so on.
Brianna, as we're waiting for the with the poll, we have had a couple. So a simple question: what does BRE and BREEAM stand for?
Great question. So BRE stands for Building Research Establishment. And BREEAM stands for Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method. as a starter. So let's go ahead and close the poll. I think hopefully we've got everybody's responses there. All right, so a nice mix of commercial and residential, very exciting because we cover both, so that's great. And then looking at interest, a lot around net zero energy and health, well-being, and safety. Well, that's great because we're going to cover those topics. Really excited there. Okay, so let's kick off. So given our background in building science and research, this is something that we've looked at a number of topics over the years, right from our inception. In fact, when we started in 1921, we were looking at the quality of construction materials going into housing for returning World War I veterans. So that gives kind of an understanding about what our timeline really starts with. So when sustainability and sustainable development became a term in the late 1980s, it was really natural for us to think about, well, what does that mean for buildings? And for us, this really came into redefining those pillars to be minimizing environmental impacts, supporting and protecting occupant health and well-being, and creating and protecting asset value. To us, sustainability was all of those things together. So it wasn't simply about being green, which is one aspect, but about this broader approach and long-term viability. But there was nothing in the marketplace at that time to really define it. So that's where BREEAM was born. So we launched in 1990, and we were the very first what became known as Green Building Certification Program in the world. And we're really proud of that. For us, the science-led approach to understanding sustainability formed the baseline of thinking about how sustainability delivers and measures business risk and opportunity. So today we have certifications in 89 countries. We've issued over 600,000 certificates globally, and over 2.3 million projects have registered using BREEAM frameworks to help guide the conversation. So that's a really important part of our reach. The science base really drives a lot of that. In the US, I'm really excited. We launched here specifically in 2016, and today we have certifications in 27 states and districts. So shout out to District of Columbia who came in this year, in last year. But effectively what this is showing is the growth, not only of the understanding of what sustainability means, but the understanding that sustainability risk is business risk. This isn't about niche, kind of shiny marketing tools. This is about understanding what risks and opportunities are available and what those might mean. And we're seeing that proliferation in the US. So BREEAM has rating systems for every phase of the building life cycle. So we have new construction for obviously ground up development. We have our in-use program for existing buildings, and we have refurbishment and fit out for renovations and tenant improvements. So all of this is about thinking about life cycle holistically throughout all the way, the full building life cycle. What does sustainability mean for each of those? So our standards cover both commercial and residential. And what our programs don't consider standard, we have a BREEAM bespoke process, which allows for a tailoring and adjustment of criteria to focus on those specific asset types. Doesn't make it any easier or harder, but it simply addresses the unique nature of those assets. The standards are grouped around categories that really reflect our holistic approach to sustainability. So as you can see, the environmental performance aspects are there: energy, transport, water, and so on. But we also have our health and well-being category, again, focused on the occupant health and well-being. How does the building enable healthy occupants? We also have a resilience category, and that is all about looking to the long-term future, not only to how we're addressing physical risk, much of it climate related, right? We've always addressed physical risk, but now climate related enhancement to that risk, transition risk, and social risk. And all of these things together for us help define what sustainability means. But not all areas. Oh, yes, go ahead, James.
Yeah, if I might, we've got another question that came in. So with other green programs, we see a push to building in urban environments and feeling penalized if we are building rural or in a greenfield. Can we get BREEAM certified if we are not in a dense urban environment?
Absolutely. And in fact, that map that I showed you, a lot of those are in suburban or rural areas. So the big question here is around trade-offs, is that sustainability often has trade-offs. You have to make a balanced decision based on impact. So what BREEAM does is actually provides a way of considering those impacts and impacting the decision-making. So each of our categories in our programs is weighted, and these weightings reflect the impact level of those particular categories. So there's a whole aspect here of making decisions based on that impact. And that's where you can really look at, from a particular asset level, what matters for this asset. So in our new construction programs, we've actually split the United States up into regions. We have 10 regions, and each region has its own weightings for that. It reflects over 40 different factors that are taken into account. So for example, the regulation of PM 2.5 and PM 10 particulates. So those are the kinds of things that go into that sort of thinking, and that helps adjust the weightings. Now, in our in-use program, which is for existing buildings, we actually use the same weightings on a global scale, because the management of buildings and those aspects, the impacts actually are pretty uniform, even when you take into account climate and regionality. Now, there are things within the program that actually adjust for that, but this is just from the weightings perspective. Now, you may notice in use, we have two graphs here. We have two parts within the BREEAM in use program. And this is where it's really split between looking at the physical structure, which is part one, and looking at building management performance, which is part two. So that's why they have two separate weightings for that. They're independently scored and assessed, so clients can pursue which part or parts reflect their responsibility and control.
And glad that you spent a little bit of time there talking about the difference, because we did have another question pop in, and maybe based on their question, maybe if you could dig into the differences between asset and management performance, because I'd like to know why an owner would choose either of those parts.
Sure. So the asset performance focuses on the physical structures. So the building itself, the envelope, the fixtures, the fittings, and so on. The management performance part two focuses on the operational side. So the management decisions that are made on how to operate it and on that actual performance. So if we think about it through like an energy perspective, under our energy category in this, we'd be looking at the energy efficiency of the systems in the building. And under part two, we'd be looking at the energy consumption data. Now, the difference here is really around responsibility and control. So depending on where the owner has that level of control or management is how that they choose which part. So for example, industrial assets, or where there's only where it's triple net leased, clients can pursue just the part one certification and measurement, because it's all the areas and things where not only they have access and control, but also they can look to invest to enhance value. They don't control operational performance. There's no reason and no way that they can make any improvements there. So we typically see both part one and two pursued in asset types where the owner and manager work very closely together. So commercial office space, for example. So that, again, provides a flexibility. And that really is a hallmark of BREEAM, is that flexibility and absolutely being able to approach this based on a practical kind of application of how sustainability really works in the in the real world on this. Now, one other aspect around this regional approach that we take with the new construction program is we also look at regional standards around a number of areas. Again, it's all about being able to focus on what's applicable in these areas. It's a fantastic way, again, of reflecting the realities of what is on the ground and being able to bring that through. It doesn't change the outcome. It doesn't change the other aspects around performance, but it does allow for understanding the benchmarks that sit in those particular regions. So BREEAM has, in our new construction program, we have 5 ratings. In our in-use program, we actually have 6 ratings. So why the difference, right? The 6th rating, the acceptable level, which we only have for in-use, is actually all about recognizing the long tail of asset and performance that we have in our existing building stock. As everybody knows, we had what I'd like to call the period of ugly. We had a horrible time, and we have buildings that are performing horribly, a good couple of decades where we all have to collectively look back and say, what did we do? How could we go so wrong? We're looking at this and saying, okay, what are we going to do about these assets going forward? So that's why the acceptable level is present in our for our in use. But effectively, this is all about what level of performance is really included. So we expect in both our new construction and in use programs, we expect that 75% of projects should be able to achieve a BREEAM rating. But the question really comes as you go up this scale, and you can see how each of these bands starts to narrow. So BREEAM outstanding, our top level, we would expect only the top 1% of buildings to be able to achieve this. Now, this is very stringent. It is hard to do. But think of this as the ladder of sustainability opportunity, because what we see here is actually the ability for 75% of buildings in the built environment and projects to be able to demonstrate sustainability value. What we do is we provide the rating, the transparency around the decision-making, and the market places the value on that rating. There are some sectors that at this point, transparency is king. They don't want anything other than just understanding the risks and opportunities that are present. In other sectors, there are expectations around what rating will be achieved at a minimum. The question is, which sector do you work in? What do your stakeholders want? And for many of those stakeholders, now it's really shifting away from the tenant focus more towards investors, because this is where the risk and opportunity aspect and the asset value aspect really sit. So what does that look like? So we've talked a little bit about the flexibility that comes with BREEAM. So you've got the weightings of the categories. One of the other things that we bring in are also minimum standards that are linked to the ratings themselves. Now, these are not prerequisites. When we talk about prerequisites, a prerequisite is, picture that as the floor, right? Everybody must achieve that just to get started. A minimum standard functions more as a cap. So essentially what this means is that these ratings can't be achieved unless certain minimum standards are met, and then move forward. And these build up as you go up towards our higher ratings. So under new construction, you can see just for the basics, health and safety management on site, no high frequency ballast, no asbestos, Legionella management in place, and legally harvested timber. Not FSC, not certified timber, but just legally harvested. Can we all agree that these are important things in any project? But these all function, again, as a cap on the rating, not a minimum, which everybody has to meet from there. We also have minimum standards in our in-use program, as you can see from there. And again, from the starting point from acceptable, it only starts in part 2 on that side. But these are all about, again, providing guidelines and a framework for thinking about what truly matters, what is important, what does a sustainable building look like? And BREEAM really provides a framework for thinking about that, even from an education sense, even for organizations and projects that have not committed to certification, to that transparency, that's fine. The BREEAM standards are fully available at no cost and can be used for understanding and educating both practitioners and clients on what sustainability value really looks like. So from a certification process, we offer, under our new construction program, we offer 2 types of certificates. We offer design, which we call our interim, and we also offer the final certificate, which is post-construction as built. We think of this as design is the promises we've made, and the final certificate is the promises we've kept. And we know there's sometimes differences between those 2 things, right? Things happen. Supply chains are problematic. We certainly know that that's been going on in the last couple of years, right? The key thing here is that we know that investors and other stakeholders who are looking at risk and opportunity are looking to understand the final product. Design has a lot of value. Getting a certificate at design level, it has a lot of value to it, particularly for pre-leasing and other aspects, but it really is about that final certificate that comes with it. Now, when it moves into the in-use phase, that certificate is only valid for 3 years. So I should mention those other certificates, because they are around a specific process, that certificate is valid for the life cycle of the building. However, when you get into in-use, right, this is a 3-year certificate because operations is all about maintaining that over time. So certification is offered for one or both parts, and we do have a volume program available for that. So these are all ways, again, from thinking about a life cycle perspective, is understanding how this building is performing, the promises that we've made, the promises that we've kept, and whether or not it's actually meeting the design intent that was brought in. Now, how does this program work? Well, we have two types of BREEAM professionals. We have the advisory professional and the assessor. The advisory professional works very much as a traditional consultant. It's all about supporting the client and making good decisions, informed decisions, to help meet the rating goal that they're looking to achieve, or whatever other outcomes come from that. But the assessor is different, and the assessor is the only one of these two professionals that's required for certification. So the assessor does the evaluation and verification work and effectively awards the credits and the rating. They're not there to provide an advisory, they're there to do strict verification work, and they are required. So these are two key professionals that we have in this kind of ecosystem. And we publicly list all of our professional organizations on our website, which we can make available after this. So what's BREEAM's approach? Okay, well, the first thing is measure what matters. There's a gazillion different things that you can measure in buildings. The question is, what is the impact? And this is where we set this out. What truly matters, what data matters to translate that into information and insights that can help inform decision-making. The second thing is about scaling and being able to handle thousands and thousands of assets across the world. And we work with some of the biggest global investors who use BREEAM to make these decisions. And this also includes new construction where there's repeatable opportunity, but effectively using the framework to be able to think about how do you establish these design standards to deliver consistently a sustainable performing asset, regardless of where it is developed or operated in the world. BREEAM can provide that framework. And the last aspect of this is certify it all. In our view, this is all about transparency of risk and opportunity. It's not simply about awarding the best. And for us, this transparency is really crucial. We see this now with the concerns from investors about greenwashing. Not everybody wants a high-performing building. There's whole segments of the market that are actually looking at value add, where they're taking assets, particularly in the existing world, taking assets, renovating them to be just that bit better, maybe not the best, but just that bit better, and then selling them on from there. There's a whole world of opportunity out there. And for us, this certification is really about that transparency, not necessarily the best. And our certification receives full credit for building certifications under GRESB, which really recognizes BREEAM's holistic and robust approach. And that's really important. All right, so how does this work? So from the AP and the assessor point of view, so the AP is going to support answering questions about performance and providing documentation, that really traditional piece, right? The assessor then sets up the assessment process, which includes a site visit. And this is a really critical aspect that distinguishes BREEAM, is the requirement to have this site visit. The site visit is, and in our in-use program, it typically just need one site visit. With construction, it can be one or more, depending on the construction cycle. But effectively, the assessor really can help set out what is required for the particular project in mind. And they put together the assessment report and then submit that for certification. That report comes to BRE, and we put it through a rigorous quality assurance process. And that certificate is only issued once it passes that process. So we have BREEAM professionals all over the United States, including, of course, Jordan and Scala engineers. So there is plenty of information out there to be able to support you on whatever project you're working on and grow your own knowledge around how BREEAM could apply. Now, that's the quick introduction about BREEAM and what we do. So, but I want to put this kind of in the context of these bigger questions. You know, there was a time when certification was just talked about again as, you know, it's the badge we get, it's the plaque we put on the wall, isn't that important? But what does this mean? What's actually driving certification? And why is it important that transparency around risk is become so critical and actually catapulted above, say, you know, tenant demand? Okay, so the starting point is really this. And I'm sure for this audience, this will not be anything new, that climate risk is growing. We have a lot of decisions to make, and there's a lot of impact that needs to be made very quickly for us to avoid the worst case scenarios. And when we started in 1990, climate change was something that was going to happen in the future. And today we find ourselves here. And this is a very real lived experience now for many communities who've been hit in multiple years by climate-related and fueled events. And beneath each of these events, these are just the billion-dollar events. This is put together by NOAA. It's a fantastic resource, and these are just the billion-dollar events. This doesn't highlight the damage that is being done in communities, to buildings, to our infrastructure, in communities where they simply weren't ready for, say, in Dallas, for example, where they now have a winter. And the buildings were not prepared for having a winter. And this is now the reality that's coming through. Investors and real estate companies are looking at this, living the experience, and now understanding that the risk is growing and they need to act to manage that. Now, there's a lot of conversation about ESG. What does ESG mean? ESG is really about just delivering business value. So it has 4 key pieces that come with this: risk reduction, opportunity management, reputation management, and effectively organizational resiliency. That's how it protects and delivers business value. So when we talk about ESG in the bigger sense, this all fits within this, this kind of aspect. And building certifications are part of this because it provides data, and when it's done correctly, transparency over how all of this has been impacted at an asset level. So some other risks, we think about that map of events. We're not the only ones living that, right? This is now starting to impact on investor concerns, but we're also looking at this from a perspective of at the city level. How are we going to manage resiliency? Now, it's been noted, there's some great resources from the Institute of Market Transformation. It's been noted that nationwide buildings account for almost 1/3 of annual GHG emissions, right? It's a considerable amount. And in some cities, buildings contribute even more than that. So it's natural that the cities who are on the, kind of the front face, the coal face, as the joke goes, the front face of resilience, needing to, survive and recover from these events, would be looking to solutions from that. Now, one of the things they're coming out with are building performance standards. And there's some great information about the detail that goes into this, but effectively, these are ordinances where jurisdictions are setting carbon or energy performance targets that have to be met by specific deadlines, effectively capping the carbon that can be emitted from buildings over time. And these become stricter and stricter all the way through to deliver net zero carbon by a particular date, typically 2040. Now, there are currently 40 jurisdictions who have committed to bringing in building performance standards by Earth Day next year. And you can see this across the map. And this is all about where impact is happening. These are all communities and jurisdictions that are being affected by climate risk. And we expect this list to grow. Now, the way that they're doing this, the actual metrics that they're using in building into law vary considerably. And if you are working in any of these jurisdictions, you should get to understand them, particularly if you're on the design side, because you need to be designing buildings to deliver, to ensure that they do not fall foul of these laws. But it's a really important thing to understand how building performance standards work and the work that's going into this. So this is a regulatory aspect at city level. And for national operators, this is a real headache because we don't have uniformity on how this is being done. There's a lot of work being done to do this, but it's a really big driver and a risk aspect, not only from a cost perspective, but also from a reputational aspect. And investors are demanding transparency around climate-related risks. The regulatory aspects really come into this, but it's also at the asset level. What about the transition to a decarbonized building? You know, what about the cost that goes into that? There's a lot of risks that have to be considered. There's also considerable opportunity, and it becomes really easy for us to kind of doom and gloom it and be like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? How are we going to decarbonize? What about, you know, how many efficiency programs can we run? There's a lot of opportunity that comes from this as well. And to be able to pivot this into the business opportunity that it is, it requires thinking about that bigger picture too. How do we add sustainability value as we decarbonize? And this is where the holistic approach that BREEAM really takes is a big part of this, because we focus on not only holistic evaluation, but holistic solutions. What other challenges can we solve with the decarbonization solutions that also get us to that point? And that brings me to the last bit about social impact. James mentioned that I oversee our global team looking at social impact, which is a really interesting and fast emerging topic, right? We've only really started to reckon with it in the US really since 2020 with the murder of George Floyd. This has been a huge aspect about thinking about what social impact real estate and buildings have. But we can acknowledge a couple of things. One is that the way places are planned, maintained, built, and operated impact jobs and economic growth, as well as contribute or to the detriment of the health and well-being of those at the asset and surroundings. That is all well known. And also the fact that lower income communities bear the brunt of the negative social impacts from assets. They are less resilient, less able to cope with those impacts. And we see that now with resilience too in more vulnerable communities. So thinking of that, social impact really, really matters to us. And there's a lot of work being done. As I said, this is an emerging field. You know, the environment side, what we need to measure, what we need to, what actions we need to take, we kind of know. I mean, we just do. Not, you know, we know what we need to do. We just need to make the decision to do it. With social impact, we're still learning an awful lot about it. So there are resources available to start understanding how this is being defined. ULI has some great resources. So the 10 principles of embedding racial equity in real estate development. And there's some great working groups to really learn about the history of how real estate has had those impacts, not just on racial aspects, but on income disparities and so on. And actually how we can think about the impacts that real estate has on that wider social impact. So lots of opportunity out there as well. And these are things that, again, when we're thinking through the lens of decarbonization, we should also be thinking about how can this help address other aspects as well. Community resilience is one of those. And then finally, we come to global drivers. And these are really big aspects. These are things that are happening outside of the United States, but are hugely impacting what we are doing as an industry, as a real estate industry. So first one is the EU taxonomy. This is effectively classifications for how green an investment is. There's a related regulation called the SFDR. I'm not going to even spell it, like do the whole thing for you. You can Google it. It's a little complicated. The whole thing is, though, is that this is all about labeling and avoiding greenwashing. This taxonomy is now impacting what is going on in the United States, and US real estate and investors are subject to some of these reporting requirements. We're at BREEAM, we're really helping to try and support our clients to help report against this and align and all the things that need to happen so that it becomes less intrusive, let's say, but these are things that are heavily affecting it. There's also CREM, so the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, and this is all about understanding the stranding risk for assets with a decarbonization pathway. ULI is hosting a working group on CREM, so if you're interested in joining, it is open to all folks. It's a public group. It is a really important tool that came out of Europe. And it's very much investor-driven, trying to understand the stranding risks that come with this. And then finally, there's GRESB. So GRESB stands for the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. They've moved beyond real estate now. I love that hashtag, beyond real estate. They now do infrastructure too. So now it's just GRESB, like Just Jack. But effectively, they are an entity or organizational level ESG benchmark. So if you think about BREEAM as a building level sustainability performance benchmark, they go one step above that, and they're looking at entities, so whole portfolios, that sort of thing. GRESB reporting is used by institutional investors to understand ESG performance and to rank those. GRESB effectively ranks entities against each other. It's a peer-based benchmark. And this is really critical. It's used by over 170 institutional investors, and this is heavily influencing decision-making on where capital is invested. Now, you can imagine how important this might be. BREEAM really feeds into GRESB, but in fact, later on this month, we're going to be launching a report or a crosswalk with GRESB and how BREEAM kind of fits in with that. But it's an incredibly important thing to understand as a driver for owners and particularly larger ownerships looking for global investment because this is how they are viewed and ranked. GRESB is really critical. And then underpinning. Oh, go ahead, James.
Oh, I just wanted to say, thanks for digging into the depth of GRESB there. We got a number of questions about what GRESB is all about. People saying, that they're hearing about GRESB all the time, but not understanding. So, thanks for digging in deeper. Hopefully a lot of the audience will, get some value from that deeper understanding. I agree. GRESB is definitely kind of jumping into the forefront of a lot of discussions that even we here at Jordan Scholar are having with our clients and about GRESB reporting needs.
Yeah, it's a really critical piece to understand because this is the measure by which organizations are presenting themselves to the world, right? This is how they get capital. This is the direct line. So, if you, for those who are in attendance, if you are working on, even from a design perspective, understanding the link between building performance and how that lanes into GRESB is a really critical factor because that's effectively what ownership is going to be asking. How does this connect through? The last piece I want to highlight on this is really about sustainable finance. And when we think about finance, it truly is a global industry, right? And green bonds are nothing new. In fact, BREEAM was named in some of the earliest green bonds that were issued. But effectively, these are going to be a critical way in which, as an industry, we finance retrofits. And so green bonds underpin all of this. It's all about that transparency, right? So those big key trends, right, that we're seeing, first off is data for decision-making and reporting. Data, not only the data that is available, but quality data. How is this information coming through? Reporting is getting more and more granular. Whereas investors used to just ask the question, check yes or no questions, they are now asking for building level and portfolio level data. How much GHG emissions did you have in the last annual, calendar year? That kind of level of data and quality then really matters. The second trend we're seeing is independent verification. And again, this is all about trust and avoiding greenwashing. It's not enough to simply self-certify your data anymore. We're kind of moving into the place with sustainability data, that financial data was at one point. Nobody is going out there saying, hey, I self-certified my financial accounts, please invest money, right? This is where sustainability data is really going. Third-party verification is absolutely critical. BREEAM happens to offer that because our assessor network is also third party to us. We don't appoint the assessors, the client chooses who they want to work with, and then we do the independent verification of their work. So that is a really critical piece that we've seen really has grown BREEAM's kind of acceptance and growth because it provides that independent verification. And then finally, science-based solutions. That's a really critical piece that we're seeing now with the rise of, say, Science-Based Targets Initiative and other aspects. Science is what is driving our understanding of climate change and the impacts we are facing. It is also going to be science that helps us set our solution. So when we're looking at the frameworks in which we are using to drive decision-making, the question should always be, what is the basis of it? Where was this decided? For us, science takes absolute precedence on this. It is the key driver for what sets our standard. So I want to stop there and have another participant poll. So we have two questions. So, does this resonate? This is certainly what we're seeing, but we'd love to have your understanding about these kinds of drivers. Is this what you're seeing as well? And also for your clients, what do they care about from your view? There's often a real interesting disconnect. When we're practitioners in this field, we care about green, we care about sustainability. And oftentimes our clients don't feel like they care about the same things that we do. Let's just give it another 30 seconds for everybody to answer.
While we're waiting, talking about that independent verification, that's one of the other major green building programs came under fire many years ago. The people who ended up using the buildings, owning the buildings after they were certified, it was discovered that the buildings weren't performing as they believed that they should be. And one of the key differences that BREEAM has is that visual verification. A building owner is going to spend a lot of money in investing in a certification in the building, whether it's for themselves or for a tenant. BREEAM's visual verification model lends value by ensuring that what's being paid for actually ends up in the building, and there's a bit of a quality assessment to it. So that's one of the things I personally like about BREEAM quite significantly.
Absolutely. There's a real difference between what is effectively a desktop study and looking at documentation, and also the provenance of that documentation, right? BREEAM only accepts third-party documentation, nothing that's kind of developed as a, again, trust me, here's a record I created right over here. We're very much evidence-based, but also that visual verification. It also really supports, we see our clients in having the conversation, right? It's a human being who's having a conversation, who they can have the discussion, right? And so it's not an unknown quantity. And I think that really helps too. And we've seen on plenty of occasions actually where the assessor has really been able to identify sustainability value that wasn't reflected in the client's assessment, and been able to ask, well, according to what I've seen, this is where you should be at. Why did you not claim that, additional credit or whatever it is? Oftentimes there's a really good idea about why, but it can also go that way as well. It's not all stick, right? There's a lot of carrot that comes in with that as well. Well, let's go ahead and close the poll. Thank you very much for that. So good. All right. Well, we're not crazy. I love to hear that. I would love, obviously, on some point to find out some of the other drivers that you all might be seeing on this. But looking at the questions around what folks care about, price per square foot. Ooh, my absolute favorite question. So I guess let me pick that one up. Actually, I can imagine that's going to be a question that comes from this.
Actually, Brianna, that had popped up in the Q&A. So
this does not surprise me.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic, because price matters, right? Like, we're not going to sit out here and pretend. So I'll tell you how we approach this. BREEAM effectively is about choices, and sustainability is about trade-offs, right? There are always project constraints. I've never gone onto a project where everybody said, sky's the limit, spend whatever you want. Like, I'm sure that maybe they exist somewhere, but not on anything I've ever seen, right? So the price per square foot absolutely matters. The question is about what that price needs to deliver in the end. And with BREEAM, what we look at is, again, that flexibility that's built into the standard. No prerequisites, just the minimum standards, right? So you can really set, or at a project level, the building owner can really set, what's the goal here? What is the aspect, the level that we want to deliver for that within those project constraints? There's no straitjacket. And again, because BREEAM offers certification for what we'd expect to be 75% of projects, it certainly doesn't preclude a rating. Now, does it mean that you'll get the rating necessarily that they want from that? Will it be a BREEAM outstanding? Perhaps not, but that's part of the trade-offs. We provide the transparency, the market provides the value into the rating. So the flexibility is definitely there. And so the question we always ask is, if it's not don't do it for the certification, right? Don't do it for the point chasing. How does it add value? What is the business case for doing the things that we've put in? Now, we try very hard to define all this in our standards. So for example, if you go into our BREEAM and use standard, we always have a value statement. How does this support asset protection and value creation? Like, how does it connect with that, as well as protecting the environment, as well as protecting occupant health and well-being? You know, the value case has to be there for all of the aspects. You know, and that's where we would say, looking at that price per square foot, there's always going to be a constriction perhaps on the project, but it's all about making the best choices within that. BREEAM's framework with the weightings of the categories help you focus on perhaps where you can get the most impact for the buck. And that's where we think BREEAM can really support on that. And green certification, I noticed, you know, is 50% as well. Yeah, that's about transparency and confirmation that we, you know, really did do what we think we did. You know, I think one of the biggest things with BREEAM that and exciting aspects is working with an organization who might have established some design standards, but they never thought about sustainability explicitly. The idea to think about this and say, actually take your standard design spec and plug it into BREEAM and see what that comes out as. You might be greener than you think. You might not be green at all. The question is, what does it look like now? And what can you then think about how you can improve that going forward for the projects? Let's go ahead and close that poll. Oh, it's already done. Never mind. Okay, so let's talk about how BREEAM really delivers against these drivers. And for us, again, this is the key aspect. So first is that science base. What is, you know, for us, science drives absolutely everything that we do. We do open up public consultations on our standards. And in fact, we will be launching one specifically around net zero carbon very soon. So excited about that. Stay tuned. But effectively, the science sets the standard. We included carbon emission measurement within our standard starting in 1990 because science told us that was how we measure impact. It wasn't about energy efficiency, right? It was always about carbon emissions in the end, if we were going to make an impact on climate change. So that's the real value of using science to drive this. And also going beyond the green aspect. For us, holistic sustainability measurement is all about holistic sustainability solutions as well. That's how you get business value and asset value in. So when you're thinking about solutions and you're thinking about, you know, how do you address carbon, for example, think about what that solution could look like that could also address health and well-being and resilience. Imagine how much more business value that solution could add, and really for the cost per square foot, maybe a minor increase from there. So those are the kinds of holistic solution thinking that we really encourage through our framework. Second thing is obviously around being that scalable, flexible, and data-driven approach. Really critical. You want to measure the things that actually matter. Don't get bogged down by the noise of all the bells and whistles that can come through. I mean, shout out to that. I can also get lost in a spreadsheet of multiple data points myself. But when we think about this at a scaled level, how do you do that for 100 assets? How do you do that for 10,000 assets? For us, this is where we look at it and say, what really matters? Focus on it. Let's start looking across portfolios. How do you drive improvement? How do you understand? And also, how do you gain insights, right? So this is particularly decarbonization. This is about how you improve, how you drive down carbon footprint. How are you going to do that? How are you going to leverage the information, the data that's gathered at the asset level to help inform your decision-making? And then finally, providing transparency through certification. The transparency is critical. And that is also, you know, that again, not about being necessarily those high performance, shiny buildings, although high five to all you, we definitely need those buildings as an exemplar, but all buildings should be able to pursue sustainability and be transparent about what is present. It's not all going to be high performance. God knows that's how we got where we are now. But this is the next point, is being fully open about that. So there were a couple of topics that we wanted to cover around this. So let's talk about first, you know, decarbonizing real estate. And just to level set, you know, we really look at this almost as a hierarchy, right? So, and through a life cycle view. First, you've got embodied carbon from development, very, very important. And then it's all about, in the operational side, having a highly energy efficient envelope and systems, maximizing on-site renewables. And only after all of those are done do we source off-site renewable energy sources and offsets. So James, you mentioned about, some of the issues around, rural versus urban. This is kind of the opposite, right? Where it can feel like urban buildings are really being punished. Because how do you maximize on-site renewables when you've got a roof like this big, right? There's a whole lot of thinking about again, this is why it's a hierarchy. The most critical piece here is addressing the highly energy efficient envelope and systems. There isn't a credible net zero carbon definition in the world that does not address building efficiency. And this is absolutely the starting point. We have to minimize load before we move on to the next things. So what do we do? Well, BREEAM covers those first three. Embodied carbon from development, that's based in our new construction standard, has been from the beginning because we prioritize life cycle assessment as part of our materials category. And then highly energy efficient envelope and systems, and the renewables come from there. So we're under consideration right now, looking at how we handle offsite renewable energy sources and offsets. It is not something that we currently reward in our program. But that's just talking about energy, right? Energy isn't the only category where we look at this. So I mentioned about our materials category. There are other aspects around that highly energy efficient envelope and systems, for example, that help deliver decarbonization. So when we start looking, again, away from energy sources, we're looking at other aspects. Refrigerants are absolutely critical. That currently sits in our pollution section. Waste and water also contribute to that. So these are broader aspects. The great thing about holistic sustainability is that, it's never enough just to concentrate it in a single category. There's always other aspects through the BREEAM standards. And indeed, we reckon about half of our credits available have an impact on carbon in some way or another, direct or indirect. So there's lots of aspects of our categories that can go through that. Obviously, net zero carbon has been at the heart of our kind of mission, climate change, right from the beginning, from 1990. And actually, we partner with a number of organizations. So we're an Energy Star partner. We're very supportive of Energy Star as a program, and we work with them there, Green Lease Leaders. And we also work with Fannie Mae. Our BREEAM and Use Residential Plus program is accepted by them, very specific around energy performance, minimum energy performance for residential. So for you multifamily folk out there, if this is of interest, please let us know on that. Another critical aspect, though, is health, wellness, and safety. So these are, again, part of our core pillars. People at the heart of this, and not just people inside the building, but also the people outside the building, right? So what does this look like? So in our new construction standard, health and well-being category, obviously, right? But there's other aspects to this. We have a number of credits available in our management category that looks at construction safety, those aspects. So Consider It Constructor and other programs that help deliver a safe site and protect the people around it. We also have the pollution category, which protects communities from pollution incidents during the design build phase. Under operations, again, that health and well-being category, fantastic, focuses on the inside. The resilience and transport categories actually focus on the outside. So resilience is about how do you protect obviously, how do you protect the asset from events, but without impacting other people in the community? There's an aspect in that. And then for transport, we actually have pedestrian and cyclist safety as a really critical part connecting to the asset on site and also to public transport. That's a big part of what we do, right? A lot of it focuses on carbon. How do you identify low carbon solutions? How do you connect to public transport networks and so on? But how do you do that in a safe, accessible way? It's not going to be by walking down a 4-lane highway, I can tell you that, right? So there are aspects that are built into this, and health, wellness, and safety are really important, both inside and outside. So for those of you who are looking at deep dives on the occupant side, we do have technical crosswalks with both Well and Fitwell that are available to review. All of those, we can share some resources out after this, but we are absolutely connected in that way. BREEAM, we're all about focused on how the building enables healthy occupants. And these great groups are all about how those occupants are behaving and those aspects. So it's a great pairing if you want to do that deep dive. Social impact, again, I'm head up a group, so, I'm kind of biased here that we're awesome. But we have some great information about where we see social impact in real estate heading. And there's going to be more coming out on this year. We're very excited about that. It is a broad subject. So again, if you're interested in this topic, there's a lot of resources out there. Happy to share some of the ones that we found the most instructive. And then from a global drivers perspective, EU taxonomy, I mentioned we've built, how do our clients demonstrate alignment? We've built standard reporting tools within all of our standards in our platforms to be able to show alignment against those. We have that BREEAM crosswalk coming soon. And actually just today, we kicked off the CREM North American workshops. There's lots going on there. I just realized we're very much close to time, and now we're to the Q&A section. So hopefully I addressed almost everybody's question, but what did I miss?
Yeah, great job, Brianna. And yeah, we are actively keeping a monitor on questions that are coming in. So if anyone has a question or two prior to us wrapping up today, feel free to use the Q&A function of this webinar. I think just while waiting for some questions to come in, I think just maybe a general question, like who are the types of organizations that we're working with today, Brianna, supporting their transparency journeys?
Right. So it's a wide range of organizations, everything from REITs to private equity. Effectively, they're organizations who are looking, across multiple sectors. So we have some that are really specific. Oftentimes REITs are specific in what they're doing. So industrial is a big part of this. And that's really exciting because there wasn't a lot of conversation about industrial and sustainability even 3 years ago. And this has accelerated hugely, partly because it's the hottest investment class for the last couple of years. So that also helps. Investors have brought that over. But retail is also another one of those. So as retail shifts, their whole purpose and the way that they exist, they're also looking at how they can make that more sustainable. How can they support living communities and so on, which is actually underpins their business model. So we're really supporting in that as well. Self-storage is another one of those, hotels and hospitality, really a lot of different actors who even 5 years ago weren't engaging in sustainability, but are now.
And I might jump in here with just a key in the issue of cost. I feel it's important to mention that, of the, competitive green building programs, that BREEAM has significantly less registration and certification costs than some of the other competitors out there. In the sense that, that cost driver discussion was by far one of the biggest things that people had questions about, was certainly felt important to throw that out there, as well as to again reiterate, one of the primary takeaways of this is that 75% of buildings, as they are currently being designed or as they currently exist, can get some level of BREEAM certification. So,
well, something to add into this too is I think what's really important is what value is it delivering? Anybody can run through a process where you submit some information and out churns a certificate and everybody gets a high five, right? What I would ask is, what is your certificate doing for you? What value, in addition to printing out that certificate, is it actually delivering? Because we know there is effort and time involved with everybody. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you're looking at certification programs, is to say, what value is this certificate going to deliver beyond that? Is it going to help me drive towards my bigger organizational goals? Is it going to help me contribute and learn and think about how we do better? That often is a major decision maker and a divider between BREEAM and many others.
As well too, one of your slides brought the point about retention of talent. Being able to market what you are doing to your own employees, since we are very much still in the talent wars. Having what a value of a certification, and how that can bring to just your own significant business, and being able to identify, be transparent about what you're doing, and keep your talent, that is so critical at this point.
Absolutely agreed with that. Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. Like, what are we using this for? Is it real? Is it legitimate? And we know the differences, right? Investors know the difference too. And that's a really critical piece, is that if you had to present this to outsiders, what would they say? How sustainable is it really? And at the end of the day, we have a lot of challenges to address, and we need to be serious about how we're doing that. Science-based standards are the way to go on that.
Great closing statement. So with that, not run too much over. Thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Alan. Certainly, it's always a pleasure hearing from you guys. Always learn something new. Thank you to all you attendees. We'll be in touch with a link. If any additional questions remain, be sure to reach out and to one of the email chains, or to contact Brianna or Alan, and we'll get your questions addressed. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.